Hey everybody, welcome back to the Combo Couch. It is Fiorella Isabel, and I am going to be getting the show on. Pasta will be behind the scenes engineering the show, and I'm just going to have a really quick show today. I do have work really early, and it's 10 o'clock here in Moscow, but I really wanted to discuss this, and if you guys would please share the link, any sort of talk about Peru and any anti-imperialist foreign policy always gets suppressed on YouTube. We're also on Rumble. If you guys can also share the link in the chat as well. I have with me one of Kawsachun News's half, Ollie Vargas. And Ollie, of course, works with Camilla, who we've been on the ground with multiple times. And we love the work you guys do. And it's really, I'm excited to have you on because you're a Bolivian in part, and I'm Peruvian. And there is a lot of just commonality and a lot of things to discuss between of what's happening now in Peru and what happened in Bolivia in 2019. So welcome, Ollie. Thank you for taking the time.
No, thank you for having me on to talk about it.
Yeah, so this isn't really being covered the way it should. Okay, so from the ousting, of course, of Pedro Castillo, which I covered his election, and from the beginning, his election was riddled with a lot of bias against him because of where he came from, because he was from the rural area of Peru, because he was who he was. There was obviously the country has a racist past, but also economics based. The fact that he was challenging the establishment of Peru, which we know the Congress of Peru has so much power and has gotten rid of the last, I believe, 7 or 8 presidents that the country has had. And now, of course, Dina Boluarte is the current president. Castillo was pretty much betrayed by the majority of the people around him. He didn't really have a chance to govern the way it was intended. And we're at the point where Peru's indigenous rural population has rebelled against the establishment, which a lot of people, I don't think this has been discussed enough, is obviously it's a US backed, but there is intelligence, of course, at play here too. And you're on the ground in Peru. And just first of all, I just want to ask, what do you think is the most important thing that people who aren't familiar with what's going on in Peru, who haven't heard, should know about the current demonstrations against the government by the people of Peru?
Yeah, well, the past couple of days, I've been in Desaguadero, which is like the border town in Peru, it's on the border with Bolivia, and I'm back in La Paz now. And essentially, there's everything was absolutely closed. There's nothing, restaurants or anywhere to stay because everyone is taking part in a general strike. It's total shutdown in pretty much the whole of the south of Peru. There wasn't even any government workers, like no migration staff, no police. The police had left, had basically retreated from those areas, and when I saw the protests of the people were holding in that town, it was clear that they're not going to back down at all. In fact, it's going to grow. There, yesterday they said that in 2 days they're going to be sending, thousands of people to Lima, the capital city, and not have the protests just in our regions. And the protests are going on pretty much across the whole of the south, which is sort of indigenous Andean, also in some Amazonian areas, and even in Lima itself, where we had protests, not necessarily the strike that we've seen in the rest of the country, but there's still been large protests in Lima. And yeah, so in the next couple of days, we're going to be seeing sort of thousands of people from the indigenous Andean South going to the capital city. And the demand is just the fall of the government, the resignation of the president, Dina Boluarte, especially, and that has, I think, become non-negotiable ever since Monday when there was a massacre carried out in the town of Juliaca. And well, my plan was originally to go to there, but it was pretty much impossible because there's so many sort of barricades erected by protesters all along the different highways going towards, across the whole of the south of the country. So it's impossible to move about. But being there just crossing the border from Bolivia to Peru, could see the strength of the feeling. There was all the different communities from around the town as well flooding in to join the protest. The protests themselves were completely blocked off the border with Bolivia. They allowed me through so that I could, report on it, but no one is allowed in or out. There's huge, the huge exports that Bolivia has to Peru is obviously completely paralyzed. And yeah, it's a total shutdown in most of the country, and they give no sign at all of backing down.
The way media has covered this in what I've seen in Western media particularly is the protesters are using violent tactics. We had Ben Shapiro say, "Oh, well, Brazil is being covered so much by media because they're framing them as right-wing violent protesters." Meanwhile, the media isn't covering Peru because it's a bunch of left-wing rioters. So that's like the sentiment of course, of a lot of people, and the protests largely aren't being covered. I mean, even in independent media, this isn't being discussed the way it should be discussed. And it reminds me of the Bolivian coup in 2019, where it was happening and people were getting murdered. And nobody was really talking about it, save you guys and a few other people. So, what exactly do you say about the framing that these people are being violent, they're stopping the economy, they're just being there's another group that is the counter protester movement that is saying, oh hey, we want to bring peace to the region. What do you say to that and the way that's being pushed out?
Yeah, well, there was coverage initially when Pedro Castillo was arrested. Essentially, what happened there was the president, sort of a more progressive president, Pedro Castillo, he announced that he was going to suspend Congress and call new elections. And the reason for this was that Congress was going to vote to impeach him and install a right wing government that was going to do all the things that we've seen happen. And he was trying to prevent that by calling new congressional elections. However, the Congress then votes to impeach him anyway, and the police and military back the Congress, in which right wing parties have a majority in. And a lot of those parties in Congress, I'd say, more like shell companies, by different business interests and stuff like this. So there was a lot of coverage in media about that, saying, "Oh, Pedro Castillo, this is anti-democratic. He's closing down Congress. This is awful, etc., etc." And then once the new government was installed, people were saying this is a victory for democracy, etc. And then once the killing started against the indigenous majority in the country, that's where the coverage ended, and we haven't really heard anything since then. So and of course, the reason we haven't heard anything since then is because the new government is a close ally of the US government. Is a country that is attacking the progressive governments of the region, like Bolivia, like Argentina, Mexico, Colombia. So I mean, it's in a context in which the rest of South America is electing left-wing governments. It's incredibly important for the US to have an outpost there in Peru. So that's why we haven't really seen any uh, critical coverage in US media, even as the deaths pile up. Even, in December, when the death toll was about 30, we didn't have any coverage. After Monday, when the massacre in Juliaca, we didn't see almost any coverage, or the coverage that there was. It would be to say that there were clashes and, uh, 10 dead in violent clashes in Peru, which
Mhm.
obscures the fact that only one side was doing the killing. None of the death toll, in the death toll of about 46 total in Peru, none of them are military or police. All of them are civilians killed by military and police. So it's not clashes, it's massacre, and that's what is not reported on in the media.
Yeah, and along those lines of what we're talking about, the U.S. involvement, what is your opinion about the fact that, of course, Elisa Kenna, who worked for the CIA for 9 years, has been out vocally saying, well, we're going to work with Peru to curtail on the drug trafficking problem, who immediately backed, along with the OAS, the former or vice president, current president, Dina Boluarte, who without question just recognized this government in contrast to, of course, some of the Latin American countries that you mentioned that were saying Pedro Castillo deserves asylum, he deserves to be heard. And of course, his family went to Mexico, but he wasn't allowed. How involved is, in your opinion, the CIA in perhaps other security agencies, and why specifically? I mean, we talk about Peru and Bolivia, we talk about lithium, we talk about copper, we talk about rich natural resources. One of the things that Pedro Castillo's party and he went in with was no more poor people in a rich country, which is exactly what goes on, of course, in many of our Latin American countries. Wealth is exported out of the country. And one of the things that Castillo never got to do was to really hold these multinational corporations that are, of course, very friendly with Keiko Fujimori's government, with the right wing Congress. What is your opinion on those connections?
Yeah, as I said, the U.S. ambassador in Peru, Lisa Kenna, she was 9 years, I think, at the CIA. She worked for Mike Pompeo. She worked in the Iraq political office during the Iraq War, and has had a number of sort of diplomatic posts in Middle Eastern countries where there's conflicts, where the US is involved in conflicts. So yeah, she's clearly an operator. Just after the coup, she announced a big a sort of multi-million dollar cooperation agreement to fund Peru's anti-drug efforts, and that's basically a cover for saying that today the US is going to be funding the security forces, the military and the police, under the guise of anti-drug work, but really it's happening just at the time as the repression is going on. So the US is backing that and funding that repression. And of course, the two countries with the highest production of cocaine in the world is Colombia and Peru. And Colombia, for all its history up until literally a year ago, was always had pro-US governments. In fact, Colombia's always been the closest ally for the United States in Latin America. And Peru's always been a close ally of the United States as well. And those are the two countries with the highest level of cocaine production in the world, by a very large margin. So we know that the United States is not serious about that. That the Irish using it to funnel money to the forces of repression in Peru. And yeah, in terms of the regional reaction, Bolivia, Mexico, and Colombia and Argentina currently still don't recognize the government of Dina Boluarte. She wasn't elected, and they still refer to Pedro Castillo as President Pedro Castillo. And it's, if this had happened a couple of years ago, the government of Peru now would be a lot stronger. But now they're actually quite isolated, and they're pushing themselves into further isolation by attacking all these countries. There's, even people in Congress saying that Bolivia's ambassador should be expelled. They banned Evo Morales from entering the country. They're trying to use him as a scapegoat for wider protests are happening. And yeah, that's how they're trying to explain away why the majority of people are upset, but it's actually making people a lot more upset, because it's basically delegitimizing why they're going onto the streets by saying that you're just being controlled by a foreign puppet master when they're there for domestic demands, which is the resignation of the government, constituent assembly to create a new constitution, nationalization of natural resources, because in the current constitution in Peru, natural resources are privatized by law, by constitution. So people want to overturn that whole setup.
Hey, Ollie. Craig Pasta Jardula here, the other half of the combo couch. I'm sorry, like emergency in my room today, so I wasn't going to come on. But I do have a question, and I've been dying to ask you because I was watching some of your coverage on Democracy Later the other day. Great work. And you had talked about the demands from the people out in the streets. Number one, they wanted the immediate government that has been christened by Lisa Kenna and the West to step down immediately. Number two, they wanted snap elections, meaning right away, have an election right away. But number three was kind of interesting, and you kind of alluded to it right now. And I think that might be like the underlying problem that a lot of people aren't necessarily looking at, and that is Peru's constitution. What about Peru's constitution, other than the natural resources part about privatization that needs to be changed? Because I see a lot of similarities here with Peru, the way their constitution is kind of framed, to where the West can come in and just remove a president. Very similar to what we see in Pakistan, where Imran Khan was removed with a couple phone calls from the State Department. Isn't Peru's constitution one of the underlying issues right here that really needs to be changed? Because even if they get a new president, why can't they just do this to the next president if the West doesn't like that president? And thank you.
Yeah, exactly. And the constitution that Peru has now was created in the 90s by the dictator Alberto Fujimori, which is the last dictator that Peru has had. He was obviously a very, very close ally of the United States. And they created a constitution in which, you do have the privatization of natural resources enshrined into law, in which you don't recognize the indigenous nations of Peru, which are the majority of people who are now protesting, and that's what people are demanding. Really, one constitution is similar to that of Bolivia, in which, for example, the cooperation with the United States. United States military presence is illegal under the constitution and under law. That's the sort of things that people want in a new constitution that would be created by a constituent assembly, and that's why the current government want to block that at all costs. And in fact, there's even a Congress person, the president of the Congress in Peru, has put forward a proposal to go into law that would ban any political party that doesn't believe in the current constitution from standing in elections. So that means that no one who believes in repealing the current constitution would even be allowed to stand in any possible elections, which would mean that there would be sham elections. So those are the sorts of things that people want to change. But the issue of natural resources is really central, and even at the protest I was at yesterday, that was one of the main points people were raising, because next year, essentially this year, next year, we're going to have a lot of the state concessions for things like lithium and gas, gold, etc., where the state gives out to foreign companies. And that's why the government said there's not going to be elections until 2024, until all of these contracts have been given out to transnational companies. So people said there has to be elections now, so that people have the possibility to take back those resources rather than just handing them out to US and Canadian corporations.
Oh, he's muted. Ollie, you're muted. Ollie, you muted your mic. I can't hear him.
It's definitely his microphone, though, so I have nothing
Okay.
muted over here and stuff. I'll leave you. Nothing.
Something, yeah. I don't know. Something's going on with your mic, Ollie.
Deep
Because we
state.
can't hear you. No.
He was getting into the good stuff, man. He was getting into the crux of it. Like, all right, like this is like what people don't understand is that, there's a lot of finances that are involved. They think that it was just Pedro Castillo in that Twitter space I was in. Like, no, he was trying to break the law and go against the Constitution. And that's why they legally removed him. But we're like, no, there's a lot of lithium at play. Ollie, do we have you back yet?
Hello, can you hear me now?
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I was just saying that the concessions that the Peruvian government will be giving out to foreign companies is coming up, and that's why people want elections right now. And the regions where there are the most protests, the south of Peru and the indigenous Andean regions, that's where all of this is, including the Amazonian regions as well, all of the gas, all of the mining minerals. Yet these are the poorest regions of the country, yet they're the ones who fund the whole development of the country through the natural resources. So the only way to change that situation will be to take back the natural resources into public hands, and so that the regions that actually have these resources are the ones that can benefit from it. And that is what the Peruvian government and the US Embassy are the most opposed to. That's the crux of the issue, in my opinion.
Yeah, and just a couple more questions, Ollie, because I think it's important to talk about Bolivia as well, with what's happening in Peru. What similarities do you see with what happened in 2019 as in terms of the geopolitical aspect in terms of the regional aspect, but also what mistakes, what could people do to not allow another massacre to occur without it being covered the way it should, like it wasn't, frankly, in 2019 in Bolivia?
Yeah, I think it's really important that we do maintain coverage and we do point out why the media doesn't want to, especially sort of international US based media, doesn't want to cover what's going on in Peru and what's at stake there. The fact that the government's only been in power about, I think, like 43 or 44 days, and they've killed 46 people in that time. So more deaths than days in power. And yeah, but I think the Crim in Bolivia, although that also didn't get media attention, I think we did actually force it onto into public debate. But by the sort of small platform we have, I think we were able to punch above our weight and show the world what's going on. So I think people are a bit more aware. They do smell the rat when it comes around a bit more easily. It is a bit easier to identify these things as they're happening and to see the similarities. And there is a lot of similarities with why this happened and why the coup in Bolivia happened. So yeah, I think people it is programs like this and our own outlet is helping people to join the dots and raise awareness, and that's the most important thing, because I think the US government relies on people when they carry out things like this. They rely on either people not knowing what's going on and they can all just do this without anyone bothering them, or if they do know, then there's propaganda to say why it's absolutely right that it did happen and it was good, and in fact the US is helping these people from their own incompetence, whatever. So the more we can break through that, the harder it becomes for the US government to carry these things out.
Well, in the macro aspect, Ollie, we have seen what many call a pink tide in Latin America. Progressive governments like in Argentina, Mexico, Honduras. You have obviously Bolivia having recuperated from the 2019 coup attempt full-on coup of Evo Morales. And then you have, of course, other countries like Peru that were able to gain somebody like Pedro Castillo. But of course, now we see the ousting of that. We have Lula da Silva in Brazil. Of course, we just saw what happened, which I think there's so much that could go into that. But is there an actual pink tide? Or is there something else? Do you think that Latin America is moving to the left? And what is the left in Latin America? Because a lot of people in the United States have an idea of what leftism is that, in my opinion, just isn't reflected in the politics of Latin America.
Well, there is a majority of countries that have elected left-wing or progressive governments in the region, especially in South America, even in Central America as well. We've got Honduras, there's Mexico as well, that's played an important leadership role in the region. And I think that those numbers could increase even further over the next few years. However, what we're also seeing is that there is a certain weakness to this current wave of governments that have been elected. Obviously, Pedro Castillo was only elected a year and a half ago, and there's this coup. I would say that sort of a soft coup had already taken place in Peru a long time ago, when Pedro Castillo was forced to take out some of his sort of more left-wing ministers. I think that was a sign of how weak the government was. In Argentina, for example, we've seen like assassination attempts against the vice president Cristina Kirchner. We've seen the fact that they haven't been able to get over the legacy of the right-wing president Mauricio Macri, that essentially plunged Argentina into massive debt with the IMF to such an extent that the country is still reeling from that, and they're still experiencing inflation and a debt crisis. In in numerous countries of the region, we see a certain weakness of the government being elected, but that doesn't change the fact that there is a majority of countries that have elected progressive presidents. They're not all of the same hue, so to speak. I think Bolivia's government, for example, has a much more clear ideological and political direction around nationalization of natural resources and around state-led investment growth. Whereas countries, for example, like Chile with President Boric, has had a much more it's had a much slower pace of change. They haven't implemented a lot of these policies. They haven't normalized relations with Venezuela, for example, and Cuba. So there is as well a certain variation within these governments. So it's difficult to find what left means. I think for me, I would say the most important principles would be that of sovereignty and national independence away from the United States. And so I think that ties together most of the left-wing governments in Latin America, even including, for example, Mexico under President López Obrador, which doesn't have as left-wing policies, economically as, say, Bolivia, but which I think has taken a very, very clear stance about protecting its national sovereignty and national independence. So I think that's why there has been a lot of positive cooperation between Mexico and most of the left-wing governments in Latin America. So even though there is ideological differences, where there is a commitment to national independence and sovereignty is where I say we can say that there is a left-wing tide, at least in the majority of countries in Latin America.
And in terms of Peru, it seems like the country is obviously it is in a dire situation right now. It's been going through presidents because the Congress is all too powerful and controls much of the government. Do you think these protests will end, and if they do end, under what circumstances? And also, what do you think needs to happen to get Peru out of this situation that it's in? For a long time, Peru has obviously been, as you mentioned earlier, a partner of the United States. When you go to Lima, you see the neoliberalism. And when you talk to Peruvians in the United States, the majority of them, of course, were not in favor of a lot of them, of Pedro Castillo, at least the ones in Florida that I'm aware of. And so you see a lot of the same situations with some expats that have left the country. And one of the main things of Pedro Castillo and Peru Libre was and his supporters was that Peru is not Lima, right? And so when we talk about the interests of Peru, most people just imagine Lima, but what we're seeing here is that all the forgotten people outside of Lima are coming to the forefront and demanding to be seen and heard.
Yeah, in terms of how this will end, how this sort of crisis conflict will end, for me, I only really see two options, and that is that the government itself resigns, and the other one, being more pessimistic, is that the piece of the graveyard, as they say, is that the repression will just increase. There'll be more massacres to the point where protests just back down just to end the deaths and end the killings, because they're not able to withstand it anymore. I think those are the two options, because there was attempts at dialogue even on Monday that broke down because the massacres were taking place. So there's no really, and because of the amount of deaths there have been, the government, if they step down, they will face prosecution, they'll face jail time, they would have to leave the country. So they don't really have they don't have an option for a negotiated way out. So I think we see the one side winning or the other. It depends how, if the army and the police have got enough stocks to force people into submission. That is what I think is probably the most likely. I hope, of course, I'm wrong on that. And the other option I mentioned of the government leaving and fleeing the country, I think that is also still a possibility. So we have to keep an eye on that. And the way I heard people speak was that they're not going to accept anything other than the resignation of the government. and you even got regional governors, who are not part of the left but governors in areas where that have been massacred, saying that the only way people are going to calm down is with the resignation of the government. So I think those are the two main possibilities. And in terms of the real divide as well is between Lima and the rest of the country in terms of sort of cosmopolitan elite versus the majority of the country in towns, villages that have almost nothing in common with each other. I think we see this even among the left in Peru. That is based in Lima, that is more middle class, based around universities, where they have very different priorities compared to the unions and the movements that we see in the rest of the country. I mean, I've seen, I used to live in Peru as well. The sort of priorities among certain middle class leftists in Lima is around things like environmentalism or certain identity politics. Whereas in the south of Peru, the indigenous Andean areas, that's not something that is the priorities for people. There is the issue of taking back natural resources, the issue of equality between Lima and the rest of the country, of national development. So we see a disconnect on everything, even within the left, and so that's the big divide. And people in Lima, when people from like the Andes go and live there, they're called immigrants or invaders, within their own country. So it seems like an almost unbridgeable gap. But I think the only way to bridge it would be through a recognition of the country's diversity, like Bolivia had. Bolivia is a plurinational state and a constitution in which everyone has played a role in drawing up, rather than one that was imposed by one person during the Fujimori dictatorship. So I think those are some of the ways that you could bring in to bridge the sort of urban-rural divide.
And my last question is, we see the focus right now in Ukraine via the State Department. The State Department is focused on this proxy war with Russia via Ukraine. We see NATO backing, of course, the collective of NATO backing that. However, there is always Latin America and Africa in the background due to the natural resources we've talked about. Do you see a refocus on Latin America and perhaps Latin America's emerging and growing relationship with China with this incoming multipolarity? We're seeing, of course, Brazil stay in BRICS, more countries join BRICS, Brazil joining CELAC. We're seeing this sort of more community and building and relationship building in Latin America, Colombia, Venezuela. All of this is happening. Do you see the State Department once again focusing, and did they ever actually stop focusing on Latin America?
Yeah, I think the election of Lula in Brazil, I think, is quite important in terms of strengthening Latin American unity, because with Bolsonaro, obviously Brazil is the biggest country in Latin America, the largest economy, so they have a huge amount of power. And what we saw in Bolsonaro was him turning away from Latin America, away from Latin American integration. When Trump was in power, Brazil was turning towards the US. When Biden was in power, he sort of burnt his bridges there. But he always broke all projects for Latin American integration. And so Brazil rejoining CELAC is important, because that is basically the only real forum for Latin American countries to come together without the presence of the United States and Canada. And that's why the US is very opposed to this. The US only wants organizations like the OAS, in which you have Canada and the United States there, and who can throw their power and weight about to set the agenda. But when you have forums like CELAC, and CELAC is not a left-wing organization. It has all of the countries of Latin America, whether it be left-wing governments or right-wing governments or whatever. But the point is that it is Latin America and the Caribbean, without the US and Canada, because they don't have the same interests. So that rebuilding that is incredibly important. I think we're going to see the BRICS expanding. Bolivia is even as well, proposing that it be included in a sort of BRICS plus, with a sort of a wider layer of smaller countries that are also emerging economies, also have strong growth. This is it is incredibly important. People's focus should be on Latin America. I think this is where some of the most interesting things are happening. This is where I think a certain war for influencers is happening. What we're seeing in the United States with the US government sort of pretending to be in favor of pretending to oppose the attempts against Lula, stuff like this. I think we can understand that as a way to court Lula away from China, because Brazil's ties with China are increasing by the day. That's something that happened both under Bolsonaro and now Lula. I think it's going to expand even more under Lula. The United States is very, very, very concerned about that, very worried about that. They want to try and stop that process as much as possible. So I think we're probably going to see some, friendly gestures from the US towards Brazil to try and prevent that from happening. But it's something that's already, the wheel's already in motion for that, because the China offers a partnership for mutual economic development, but also non-interference in internal political affairs. China is a country that has relations with right-wing governments in Latin America, with left-wing governments in Latin America. They don't discriminate based on whatever your national government is. Whereas the United States has completely the opposite approach, where they, even the smallest things about your domestic policies, they want to dictate, and they issue condemnations and all these sorts of things constantly. So that's the process of Latin American countries, even right-wing governments like Uruguay, grow every day, stepping up their cooperation with China because it is just a better deal. So, yeah, depending on how fast that process is, I think it's something very interesting to keep an eye on.
Well, Ollie, just let the audience know any things you guys plan on doing at Kawsachun, anything else that you are planning, any shows you're on, anything else that you want to let the audience know.
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure to follow us. Obviously, www.kawsachunnews.com. Also on Twitter @KawsachunNews. My co-founder Camila is in Brazil at the moment, reporting on events in Brazil. I was just in Peru, and yeah, we're on top of everything going on in Latin America, and we've also got our show, our podcast, Latin America Review, that you can find on podcast apps, and we cover all of these topics on there. We just had a show yesterday as well about Peru. So yeah, keep informed on there as well.
Thank you very much, Ollie, for coming on, and we'll definitely be following along with your coverage. Appreciate it.
Cheers. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thanks, Ollie.
Thanks, Craig.
Okay. So yeah, just a really good refresher on what's going on in Peru. Also, Ollie being on the ground. I wish I could be there right now. I'm like dying to go there as well. I am actually trying to go to a million places, and I can't be everywhere at once. But I appreciate Ollie coming on and giving us some input on that. I'm going to talk a little bit, fam. Did you want to come on to talk about the Twitter stuff, or because you look fine, you don't look bad?
Yeah, I know, but I'm like moving down a million things as I'm trying to engineer the show on my bed and everything.
Okay.
So I'm gonna let you do it and
all right,
make it quick so you can go to sleep.
Yeah. Okay. So we're gonna talk about the Twitter files number 14. I've lost track. We haven't really been. We've covered most of them. The thing I have with this, of course, is a lot of people have been messaging me, and a lot of other people have been going through the same thing, that they can't find me, they can't search me. My tweets are hidden. I know Misty was talking about this stuff with her too. Anybody with a Russia state label, a lot of, even though Elon Musk said no, the left isn't being isn't being censored, that we know that's not true. And so it's really frustrating to see Elon and all these people get accolades for what we already know to be true. But it's just sort of like, I'm glad it's coming out, but at the same time, I don't think it's anything we haven't heard. I'm not obviously against it because I think it's like false or anything. I think this is all true. WikiLeaks talked about this very situation with Hillary Clinton and the Democratic Party, of course, working against Bernie Sanders in 2016. We lived this moment. This is why a lot of us really who were, progressive have been so radicalized and went from that to where we are now because of what happened to Bernie Sanders. A lot of people, of course, but really felt affected when he was cheated, and nothing happened, of course. And so during that time, there was, of course, reports that there was Russian interference, that they were changing the outcome of people's votes. And it turns out that not just what WikiLeaks was saying was true, but what the Twitter files has revealed is true. That the Russiagate, of course, was a hoax, and I believe this was debunked a long time ago. But this is yet more proof in our favor of those of us that were called and continue to be called Russian propagandists and Russian bots. It's frustrating because nothing has changed in essence. I mean, in spite of all of this information coming out, the reality is that I am still labeled Russia state affiliated media by Twitter. Twitter hasn't said anything about the labels. I'm still labeled as that. It really shadow bans me. It blocks any information I have. Anytime we talk about it on YouTube, we risk getting shut down. And the sort of censorship that's happening, and one of the things that Ollie mentioned that I want to reiterate is the differences in what it means to be left, even within Latin America. There's the people who call themselves left, that are like the bourgeois left, focused on identity politics, superficial things. And then there's people focused on economics, people focused on really maintaining the natural resources. Well, these voices that are focused on anti-imperialism, on really pointing the finger at those in power, are always, whether left, right, whatever you want to call them, are always censored. And so this just pretty much reiterates what we've been saying. So let's go through it, fam, if we can go through it. I'll go through some stuff rather quickly. So this was, of course, regarding the release a memo hashtag. And I talked about this on our T earlier yesterday for both of us, yesterday, or earlier for me. And at this is what Matt Taibbi said: at a crucial moment in a years-long furor, Democrats denounced a report about flaws in the Trump-Russia investigation, saying it was boosted by Russian bots and trolls. If y'all remember, they said that a bunch of memes and a bunch of troll farms were geared at hurting Hillary Clinton's campaign, and that Trump was working with Putin to derail her campaign in order to, of course, win, not to accept the fact that Hillary Clinton was the most, if not one of the most unpopular candidates in history. And Twitter told them that they found no evidence of Russian influence. In these memos, this is what it says: we are feeding congressional trolls, not any significant activity connected to Russia, putting the cart before the horse, assuming this is propaganda bots. So they issued these statements to tell these officials, these government officials, that there was absolutely no significant connection to Russia, nothing there linking Russia to this. And further, later on, they mentioned that there was nothing that signified in no history, because there was a study done by New York University that said not only was this whole thing just blown out of proportion, but it also there was no statistical change between what people thought between these memes and any sort of vote change. So again, this was entirely exaggerated by government officials in coalition, of course, with Twitter, because Twitter said, oh, we're doing everything we can to curtail manipulative bots and networks. Twitter warned politicians that, again, not only that they lacked evidence, but had evidence the accounts weren't Russian. And then, of course, they were ignored. But even though they were ignored, they still went ahead and did this for government officials. Don't forget that Twitter did work with them. And that's exactly what's wrong with this, because Twitter is a major, giant tech platform, a company that has turned into such a powerful entity and has been used by the surveillance state to manage how you think, the information you get, and what you are allowed to see and hear. And the people talking about bots and Russian troll farms are the ones that had them. We go back to, of course, WikiLeaks, and also my own experience in Sally. What was her name? Do you remember, Pasta? Sally. Whatever. She was this Democrat operative, and she had a bunch of troll farms, and it was proven that she had multiple accounts, and it got proven that she had multiple accounts, and so many operatives had them too for Hillary Clinton's campaign. We saw the same thing, of course, with NAFO. We're seeing the same thing now happening, and those accounts aren't ever targeted. Matt continued, on January 18th, 2018, Republican Devin Nunes submitted a classified memo to the House Intel Committee detailing abuses by the FBI in obtaining the FISA surveillance authority against Trump-connected figures, including the crucial role played by the infamous Steele dossier, which was literally a nothing burger. I mean, the Steele dossier never said anything about Russiagate, never proved anything about Russiagate. It basically said that they didn't have evidence at the end of it. And this is what was used, of course, to say, wow, the Russians are helping Trump win and all of this and that. And if you look back as to when all of this started, and now you look at what's happening with Ukraine, you can definitely see this connection, and you can definitely see how all these psyops have been laid out in front of us to push us to think a certain way, to vilify Russia, to vilify outside forces as the perpetrators, as the villains, as the people that are guilty of course, interfering in our government, when the reality is our government interferes in our own government and points the finger outward. So you fight each other, right? Or points the finger at each of you so you can fight each other, or at China or Russia or some other entity that they blame. So the Nunes assertions would virtually all be verified in a report by the Justice Department Inspector General Michael Horowitz in December of 2019. And if we just keep scrolling, I'm just going to go through this rather quickly. So this whole thing was, of course, I mean, this isn't, Pasta says it, right? Russiagate was fake. Duh. I mean, this is duh. Like, nonetheless, national media in January and early February of 2018 denounced the Nunes report in oddly identical language, calling it a joke. So you can see, of course, your favorite mainstream media hacks right here, pretty much, dismissing the Nunes report, Andrea Mitchell, Joy Reid, and this is no smoking gun, blah, blah, blah. And ex-RNC chairman rips Nunes memo for the joke it is. The Onion is mad. You're stealing their material. This is what they do. If you recall what they're doing now with Twitter files, the reason liberals are so mad at it isn't because of any legitimate, like, oh, well, we knew this and there should be more. This should be open source. This should be completely just direct, like WikiLeaks. They're not mad at that. They're mad at the fact that it's being released at all. So they're trying to dismiss it as like, oh, well, this doesn't mean anything. And no, it means the fact that our government, of course, is working with these tech giants to manipulate the information you get. And that's important for people who may not be politically savvy, who may not know what's going on, to know. So I am glad this came out. However, again, we need more WikiLeaks style reports. We need this to not be so managed and controlled. But again, continuing along with this, on January 23rd, 2018, Dianne Feinstein, a wonderful Democrat of California, one of the worst politicians and senators, of course, now Senator and Congressman Adam Schiff of California, published an open letter saying the hashtag gained the immediate attention and assistance of social media accounts linked to Russian influence operations. So again, labeling everything as Russia, as we know they knew how to do. One could think, you could even, assess that maybe this is exactly what was needing to happen in order to get people to the point where they're cheering for weapons to the Azov battalion and cheering for Cocaine Zelensky to go and do whatever he wants and cheering to give medals to Nazis. Maybe, we wouldn't be where we are right now in this conflict without this whole thing happening. And so I don't think anything happens out of coincidence. And if that is true, and if all this Twitter file stuff that we know now that's coming out years later, think about what's going to come out years from now, and all the people that were wrong about Russia, Ukraine right now. Think about that. I'm telling you, we will once again be vindicated, but vindication comes so late that, it's sometimes it's just, okay, well, after the fact, at this point, what are we going to do? So Feinstein and Schiff said that the Nunes memo distorts classified information, but they didn't call it incorrect. And if you just scroll down to the next one, fam, because they do show that, but I want to go on to the next one. Richard Blumenthal followed suit, publishing a letter saying, "We find it reprehensible that Russian agents have so eagerly manipulated Americans, innocent Americans at that." So again, they pin this all on Russia, knowing that they have no evidence, knowing that there's nothing really there. And we know that this was happening in real time. A lot of us knew that. This is why we were so adamant about it. And I don't know. I know Pasta lost friends. I know I lost friends. I remember arguing with people saying that there is no evidence that Russia interfered in our elections. They were putting out memes. If you recall some of the memes they were putting out that were ridiculous, saying that these memes were influenced. And so all of these people, Feinstein, Schiff, Blumenthal, and the media pointed out to the Hamilton 68 dashboard, if you want to put that one up, created by, of course, former FBI counterintelligence official Clint Watts. And this was, of course, under the Alliance for Securing Democracy. And this is what they said. The release the memo hashtag is now the top trending hashtag among Russian bots and trolls on Twitter and other platforms, according to the German Marshall Fund's Hamilton 68 website, which tracks Russian influence campaigns. Then they went on to say, "I've never seen a single hashtag that has this amount of activity behind it," said Brett Schaefer, an analyst who helps run the Hamilton 68 dashboard, a project with the Alliance for Securing Democracy at German Marshall Fund. It tracks about 600 accounts that says it's tied to Russian-sponsored influence and information campaigns. So they basically just kept saying that the hashtag, of course, was full of Russian disinformation, that it was put out by Russian disinformation campaigns. And then the dashboard, which featured a picture of Vladimir Putin deviously blowing evil red Twitter birds into the atmosphere, was vague in how it reached its conclusions. So remember, when you talk about the fact checkers, when they talk about, oh, we have independent fact checkers, who are these independent fact checkers? Well, this is the same thing, right? They have these entities that we know work for intelligence, that work for the intelligence apparatus, and then they pretty much just frame it that, oh, it's Russia or it's China or it's this or that. And so, of course, that was a wonderful picture of Vlad there. And meanwhile, the Twitter executives banned Watts, Hamilton 68, or panned Watts, Hamilton 68, and the Alliance for Securing Democracy. Two key complaints: Hamilton 68 seemed to be everyone's only source, and no one was checking with Twitter. So again, who is this source? Why are they the only ones that are allowed to have a final say in what's going on? And of course, even Twitter came back and said, you should be skeptical of their take, which is the only source for these stories. And this was said, of course, by Global Policy Communications Chief and future White House and National Security NSC spokesperson Emily Horn. And she added, it's a comms play for ASD. So again, very manipulated information, trying to quell down the hashtag to dismiss its importance. And it was, of course, in order to just blame this, of course, on Russia. And they also noted all the swirl is based on Hamilton, said Trust and Safety Chief Yoel Roth. So there it is. And if we just go back down to 17, they couldn't find any Russian connection to the release of memo. And this is something that's important to note, because they kept saying that it was entirely connected to Russians. And he said, I just reviewed the accounts that posted the first 50 tweets with the release of memo, and none of them show any signs of affiliation to Russia. So they admitted this back then. They even said, we investigated, found that engagement as overwhelmingly organic and driven by VITs, very important tweeters, including WikiLeaks and Congressman Steve King. So this was organic. The information that came from the release of memo hashtag had nothing to do with Russia, and it was entirely organic. And they basically just kept pushing Twitter. And of course, Twitter, like I said before, eventually just said, well, we're doing everything we can to curtail the use of bots and networks and stuff. So it's not like Twitter's innocent here. Twitter did admit what they were doing, but then they went back and tried to boast about how they were doing whatever they could to stop these bots. And on 22, one Twitter executive even tried to negotiate, implying an undisclosed future PR concession if Blumenthal would lay off this. It seems like there are other wins we could offer him. So they basically, the executives got frustrated over what they saw as a circular process presented with claims of Russian activity, and when denied, it led to more claims. So Twitter was going on this back and forth with these government officials, and nothing, of course, was ever found. And they eventually got angry at Blumenthal. They said he wasn't actually looking for a serious, nuanced, real solutions, and just wanted to get credit for pushing this further. And senior executives, of course, talked about feeding congressional trolls and compared the situation to the children's book, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie. So, yeah, I mean, you guys can get the gist of that. I mean, the endless requests for the Russia was so perfect that one executive wrote that they were embarrassed. They didn't think of it first. And so again, this is just once again manipulation. These are things that we knew. And if you go to 32 fam, reporters from the AP to Politico to NBC to Rolling Stone continued to hammer the Russian bots theme despite this total lack of evidence. While this was going on in the background, there was no evidence of this happening. The media arm, of course, working with the government and with Twitter, went out and pushed this as if it were fact. And this is a problem because this is exactly what continues to happen today related to this conflict in Ukraine, this proxy war that we have with Russia. Nothing has changed. In fact, it's gotten worse. If you've seen, they've gone on steroids with this. And you could even see here at 33, Russians weren't just blamed for the release of the memo, but for hashtag Schumer shutdown, hashtag Parkland shooting. If you remember, they blamed this on Russia. Hashtag gun control now. To widen the divide, according to the New York Times. Here it is. After Florida school shooting, Russian bot army pounced. I mean, so it's laughable. But when I make jokes, when I say, hey, Putin made it rain here, or he made it snow here, and he made it snow in the States, whatever it is, I'm joking, but I'm serious because this is what they do. They push all of this nonsense saying that it's Russia's fault or it's China's fault, depending on which side of the aisle you're in. And NBC, Politico, AP, Times, Business Insider, all the greats, and other media outlets who played up the Russian bot story, even Rolling Stone, all declined to comment on the story. Of course they did, because they're part of this, and they always will be a part of this. And you know, they're not gonna comment. Of course, Feinstein, Blumenthal, and Schiff also declined to comment. And Devin Nunes actually did comment to Taibbi for this story, saying Schiff and Democrats falsely claimed Russians were behind the release of the memo hashtag. And this is 37. All of my investigative work, by spreading the Russia collusion hoax, they instigated one of the greatest outbreaks of mass delusion in U.S. history. Remember that quote, one of the greatest outbreaks in mass delusion in U.S. history. Since then, we've had many more. That was the beginning of one of the greatest outbreaks of mass delusion in human history, because once they were able to get you to believe that the Russians and kind of revitalize neo-McCarthyism into this neo-McCarthyism that we were living at that moment, now they were able to go on with everything else, with the election, with January 6th, with COVID, and of course with what's going on in Russia right now. You can't, it's kind of like I don't know, when you're training an animal, or when you're you're conditioning somebody, you can't just write out like expect somebody to behave a certain way. You have to condition them. You have to lead them to this way. And that's exactly what Russiagate was used for. Again, we wouldn't be where we are today with people clapping like seals, with Congress clapping like seals for Zelensky, for weapons to the Azov, for pushing for a potential nuclear war with Russia, just because they want to get people to believe that Putin is this evil dictator, villain, whatever, and that he's your only problem. Meanwhile, billions and millions go out for this conflict, and American people are in the streets. Things are getting worse. Inflation is out of control. And they're saying that inflation is fine. It's the lowest inflation in 12 months. But really, what does that mean? What are you measuring? Are you measuring a certain class, or are you measuring the people that don't even get included in the process? So again, the Release the Memo episode, Taibbi continues on 38, is just one of many in the Twitter files. The Russiagate scandal was built on the craven dishonesty of politicians and reporters who for years ignored the absence of data to fictional scare headlines, to fictionalize scare headlines. And of course, there's just several Twitter files, as we know, that we have gone over. There's some on COVID that have been released. There's more supplemental ones that are being released. A lot of these things we already knew. A lot of these things we've talked about. Independent media has done the investigative work for years now on this. But the reality is that this just adds another layer of proof that a lot of the voices that were screaming that this was completely debunked and this is a hoax were right. This is it. And yeah, that's your Congress right now clapping for Zelensky. When he showed up there, Nancy Pelosi, Slava Ukraini, all of these things that are happening. And the EU, of course, and the United States just approved more billions for Ukraine. They also are considering giving more weapons, direct weapons to Ukraine. And these are American-made HIMARS. When people who are in the Donbass are reporting and they're seeing, hey, what weapons are used, blah, 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 and the shelling that comes down on the people of the Donbass, most of the time what I hear is the shelling and the shells that are used. Some of these people collect them. Some of the people that are in the Donbass, this is what they're living with for the last almost 9 years. It's American made. You'll see the names of the defense contractors. You'll see the names. These are weapons are either HIMARS, they're Bradleys. These are the weapons that are used on the people of the Donbass. And to deny that the United States is involved, that this isn't a U.S. NATO collective war against Russia, is just really looking at this dishonestly, which is why we have on all the voices that have been to the Donbass that are talking about the situation, that are familiar with the situation on the ground. And again, like, I'm here partly because I want to see the country that has been vilified so much by the West, that we are so conditioned to hate. Really, how is that country? And what I've seen is the complete opposite of what we've been told to believe, that we've been told to hate a group of people that is just a regular group of people like you and me, that have families, that have lives, that really have no desire to be in this war, but that are fighting for their existence. Because one of the things, again, that Ollie mentioned earlier is, what do these countries want in Latin America? National sovereignty. They don't want to be ruled by the United States anymore. Neither does Russia. Russia does not want the US or NATO involved in their affairs. And they know that the moment that there's that line that's crossed, Russia would be dismembered entirely, as has been the goal for this entire time. So without Russiagate, without this BS bullshit that was pushed by the officials, the worst officials you can get, Feinstein, Schiff, one of the biggest Russiagators, Adam Schiff for brains, as Pasta calls him. And these people, they are the biggest warmongers, and they were, of course, also involved, some of them, in Burisma. So that tells you a lot. They've been involved with Ukrainian oligarchs. They've been involved in this situation. And I just I have to stress the fact that we wouldn't be in this conflict with Russia in this way. People wouldn't have been just wouldn't have been able to be so easily convinced if they weren't at all led to it straight before, if they weren't spoon-fed this information with the Mueller report being used and weaponized in a way that it's just there wasn't any evidence at all, and there still isn't evidence. But I will go on Facebook right now, I guarantee you, and say Russiagate was a hoax, and I guarantee you like 10 people would be like, oh my god, Russiagate was real just because, I'm not saying all of what the media says is true, but Russians are real, and they're influencing our elections. It was just bullshit, and they focus the American public on that. Meanwhile, they did away with everything that could actually help the American people and pointed the finger at Russia, as they continue to do till this moment. And not now, of course, touching on the revelations that Biden had these documents in his Corvette, right? In his Corvette. He talked about this, right? The documents were just inside my car, my Corvette, and they were just in my garage, and they were just there. And I had no idea what was in those documents. Well, now this is just theatrical, in my opinion, because now they can't do anything against Trump and the documents he had. It just goes back and forth. And one of the things we pointed out today at RT was it pointed out by Edward Snowden, because it doesn't matter how many times you find classified documents, whether it's Trump, whether it's Biden, whether it's the next guy, whether it was the former guy. It doesn't matter, because there'll never be any accountability for these presidents. There'll never be any accountability for these individuals. The reality is the whistleblowers, the journalists, the people that actually want to tell the truth about the empire and what's actually going on, they're the ones that are going to be jailed. They're the ones that are going to be persecuted. Edward Snowden is in Russia for a reason. It's because his government, of course, will go after him. And a lot of the reasons why so many journalists are coming to Russia is because they feel safer in Russia than they do in the United States, myself included. Some of the things we are talking about, we're not allowed to freely talk. And if we talk too much, who knows what may happen. We saw what happened to Julian, and and we don't want that happening. Canada is awful to its journalists. They have put some people on list, including Ava Bartlett. You have the UK trying to sanction people that work for RT, trying to sanction people that work for just any government that they don't approve of. New Zealand as well. They come to your house and they ask you, hey, are you working for the Russian government? I mean, these countries that are the Five Eyes, there is no freedom in these countries. They persecute and censor, malign, and smear anybody that is actually telling the truth in any sort of way, whether they call themselves left, right, whatever the hell it is. It doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, it is what they're saying that's the problem. And they are a threat, of course, to the establishment, the global establishment that exists there, that is trying to basically just take over every single country that wants to maintain its integrity and its sovereignty. And that's where we're at right now. And free Assange, of course. And again, these revelations just kind of just point to the fact that we are all being manipulated. We are being managed by these narrative managers, by the surveillance state. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is really just the very tip of the iceberg. It's not just Twitter, it's not just Facebook, it's not just Instagram. It's literally every social media outlet. It's literally in your phones and your computers, in every aspect of our lives, and everything we use for communication is being surveilled. It's being tracked. It is you yourself. You are data that is being mined, and that data, of course, will be used by the same people that people are now hailing, like people like Elon Musk, who did so much work for Ukraine via Starlink, and who will continue to be somebody that is tied to the CIA and tied to the national security state apparatus. And the next phase that is coming in the world is, of course, the fourth industrial revolution. This is why I talk about Latin America a lot too, is because these minerals that are there, and these minerals that are in Africa and continents in Africa, which is why the coverage have shifted to Africa as well, is important, is going to be the forefront of what this agenda is all about. So be mindful of that, and be mindful of the players in that as well. So that's all I have for today. Ron McKinnon said Five Eyes fascism. And yeah, I mean, these people, the global order, they call themselves the world. They really just, when they talk about the world and what they're talking about is the Five Eyes. They don't care about anybody else. So that's the reality. Are you asking, Pasta, if anybody's heard from Julie Love?
Yeah. Let us know if anybody's heard from Julie Love. Just concerned about her. Haven't seen her in the chat for the last couple days. I'm gonna reach out to Lucky, make sure we can see if we can get eyes on Julie Love. So, and special love to Josh Davis. How you doing, brother? See, you're having fun in the chat. You go at it, buddy. She had power issues. Well, just let's make sure we get and if anybody could reach out to her, let her know we love her. Hey, Darren, it's great to see you too. Guys, sorry for the crazy. I feel like I'm echoing and shit, and my ears are going crazy. But great show, fam. Way to get it in there. I think it was awesome information with Ollie. It's very important for us to stay on top of that, so we will do so.
Yes. And yeah, I'll keep you guys posted on sort of things. If I do go to the Donbass, I can't say when. I can't say exactly until I come back. So I will have a full report when I do come back. Okay. So be mindful of that. If it happens, it's just very difficult to really to organize that, especially in the climate we're in. So I as soon as I do come back from that, I'll definitely let you guys know, and if and when I go. So just be on the lookout for that, because it's coming one way or another. So yeah, much love to you guys. We're going to be, of course, focusing also on Cuba coming up as well in the next few months. And we'll also bring in information about all of that. And I'm excited. And
Crazy,
thank you.
Yeah. Crazy stuff still going on in Brazil, like that we're still. I'm glad you guys listen, guys. Thank you for everybody who participates or who helps out the Convo Couch or just follow us to get us on the ground. It was so important that we get there. That hasn't ended yet. We're butting heads. The information that was put out there, there's a lot of crazy stuff, dirty stuff going on in Brazil right now. That's just, I don't think it's revered its dirty head yet, and we'll see. But there was a lot of lies put out there about the election, about what really goes on. And I'm glad you guys put us on the ground, because we have the goods. We understand how the system works. The people who are putting out the information were moving the goalpost and changing the information the whole way, even to the fact that they were saying there was ballots and ballot drops when there are no ballots. So thank you for putting this out there. It was really important. Not a lot of people study the elections like we do. So I think it's important that we have the goods to explain why it was a fair election. And thank you so much for doing so.
Yeah, and shout out to Indie Left News.
Yep.
I think they just hit over 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. So congratulations to that. And thank you for always looking out for everyone and sharing everyone's stuff.
Love you, buddy.
So we love you guys, and we appreciate you. And I'll be by the way, there's so much more to cover too with the heart situation, to put it lightly, and what's going on with the COVID boop boop. And Lisa Marie Presley today, was it today? Yeah, I think it was today. Passed away from cardiac arrest. A lot of people are passing away from cardiac arrest. And yeah, so Pasta, I believe Lucky said she was there. There's a storm or a power outage. Yeah. Is there power outages? I know stuff was happening in California, in the middle part of California, like north of Sacramento and stuff. But is there other stuff happening in the States as far as crazy weather? I haven't heard, I haven't seen, but
we did get a question, by the way, fam, on we got a Rumble rant. So let me just bring it up really quick. Guys, thank you to everybody who's participating in the Rumble. It's awesome to go over there right now and do some work. Thank you if you're a member on whatchamacallit.
Oh, okay. I can say something about this.
Oh, you want to?
Yeah. What do you think about Tate being arrested? I don't know why people. Pasta, can you do me a favor? Can you go quick to a Syrian girl's Twitter?
Sure.
And she said, what I learned about the right is that they will support something. It's about Epstein. That's exactly how I feel. Uh Andrew Tate is on video talking, admitting a lot of things. So is his brother, about how they pretty much just groomed these girls, underage girls, into the sex industry. Um, it's worthy of an investigation. I'm not saying he's guilty. I am saying the guy isn't somebody you should worship. And what I've been seeing online from a sector of people on Twitter is worshiping the guy because he said some things that a lot of us have been saying for years. Nothing out of the ordinary, just like, yeah, there's a deep state, like, and there's like people, blah blah
No.
blah, and and so because this guy, who by the way is the son of a CIA, for a former CIA, I think he worked for the CIA, his dad. It's just really weird that people have made some sort of like deity, some sort of like god against him. And there's a tweet she has. Let me see if I can find that
That's not it
she
right there.
basically. No,
Right
no,
there.
no, no, no. I shared, I believe I liked it. I don't know if I shared it. Let me see. But yeah, if go to this thread, she pretty much has videos of them talking
Yeah,
about
I can
stuff and
see. I
admitting
can see
stuff.
it. So here's one right
Uh
here. Like he says this. Let's.
that's his brother.
Yeah, it's Tristan. So it
Yeah.
says, to corroborate this, Tate said, in an interview, one of my main chicks has 200,000 Instagram followers. I took her virginity when she was 17. That was legal, by the way, here. While 16 is the age of consent in Romania, grooming minors into the sex industry is illegal. So let's really quickly, I guess, play this.
One of my main chicks has 200,000 Instagram followers, and I took her virginity when she was 17. That's legal, by the way, here. I don't know if it's 18 in your crazy country.
That's his brother, but I just wanna fam, I'm putting it at the end of the document so you can just pull it up, this tweet, because I think there's something to this when we talk about there's a lot of accusations. It's not just one. And again, I'm not a judge, I'm not a jury. The guy should have a trial, right? But I just think it's too much for people to be defending, and I find it really strange. A lot of the right is defending him while simultaneously talking about Epstein. It's
And
very
going after
similar.
pit bulls.
It's similar. It's very similar, except that he is a conservative figure, and he pushes. He's a Muslim, and he pushes this extreme, of extreme male female roles, and he's been, apparently, all of the things he said before don't matter, because when you're a Muslim you have a blank slate and you start anew. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, that's just ridiculous. And so this is what she said, well, what I learned this month is that if Jeffrey Epstein said feminism is cancer, the right would be supporting him with every last inch of their credibility. I mean, I think this says it. This pretty much puts it in a nice little bow here, because just because this guy pushes a more conservative rhetoric and then talks about globalists and talks about stuff that pretty much everybody now uses to get, oh wow, they know what they're talking about. Oh, Klaus Schwab and the WEF, blah blah blah. Where were you like 3 years ago? But okay, like, it just because the dude has said some things that I don't find anything out of the extraordinary. Um, they just like think he's some sort of guy to be worshipped, and that he's against the matrix. And he does this sort of thing that I've seen other YouTubers do, where they're like, oh, I'm the most chased guy, I'm the most censored guy, they're after me, blah blah blah. I'm sorry, I don't buy that somebody like him is a threat to the establishment in any way, shape, or form. So I just think it's funny. That's all. That's it.
Yeah. Well, let's get out of here. That's it for the weekend. We'll be back on Monday. Next Friday, we definitely have Whitney Webb booked, and it's going to be good to talk to her about Peru. She has some experience with workers in Peru, in the mines and whatnot. So we'll talk to her about that, and maybe a little bit about China, fam. But I have a couple other things I'm putting together as well. So maybe like this kind of anarchist hippie panel I want to put together with Keith McHenry and our good friend Chuck, who's the green libertarian. he's a green for libertarian views, and maybe put together a good panel with them. A lot of stuff's going on, but we have things in the work for you, fam. Anything else?
Yeah, so we just released a clip of the Scott Ritter interview we did with him. So make sure to check it out. It's just a clipped out
It's on
version of
YouTube too, as well, or
Yeah. We had
good.
our friend Joe put it up on YouTube, and I will be on the desk tonight for you guys, tomorrow for me, on RT. So be on the lookout. I'll share the link at some point on Twitter and Telegram.
We got it. So that's it for today, guys. We'll see you back on Monday. You can catch Fee over the weekend. Well, I'll be out having a good time partying, not working. Fee will be hard at work. Combo out, everybody.
Okay. Combo out. Bye, guys. Good night.